So what we talked about last week and what we reviewed today was using variables. This is where we left off after our review with our super fast circle. Let me slow that guy down. And I also need to save, so I'll say lecture 2. We have our circle moving to the other side of the screen. But like we talked about, I think it was Peter said, we want to be able to check to see where our circle is, because maybe we want to move it to the other side of the screen, right? If we have our JAWS poster, we don't just want like JAWS to like go up to the top of the screen. We want them to come back down too. So how do we do that? We do that using a thing called if statements. I want you to keep this if statement thing in mind, because next week when y'all come to class, we're going to go back into our vocabulary topic here, and we're going to define what if statements are. So try to pay attention, and then next week try to come up with your own definition of exactly what an if statement is. So, oops, that's OBS. We use an if statement to check something. In this case, we want to use an if statement to check to see where our circle is. So I want my circle to stop once it gets over to this side of the screen. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a new line here underneath line 17, because I want this to happen right after I change the background color. So I will say if circ x, because that is the x position of my circle that I'm changing every frame, if circ x is greater than the one, yes, Chris, I can see your comments. Circ x is greater than, so the open alligator thing, or equal to, and I'm going to say if the x position of my circle is greater than or equal to the width of my screen. And the width of my screen is 300. So I'll say 300. I will say circ x equals 300. And I'm also going to move this line 21. I'm going to cut it, Control X, and paste it here. So just to walk through the steps, the order of operations of my computer. It's going to make the background yellow. It's going to add circle speed to circ x, which right now circle speed is 1, so it'll add 1 to circ x. And then it'll say, okay, if circ x would be greater than or equal to 300, just make circ x 300. Stop adding stuff. Don't want to add anything anymore. And then draw my circle. So let's watch this in action. So my circle's going, and then it hits the side and it stops. Perfect. Yes, thank you, SkullBX20. Interesting. You want to check numbers in games all the time, right? You need to check to see how high a score is, right? If we're playing, I don't know, say we're playing Pong, and we want to declare a winner once score hits 10, we would say if score equals 10, stop the game, right? Or we would say, like, if the player has hit a Goomba in Mario, stop the game. If the player presses the A button in Mario, if they jump, if the player presses A, jump Mario into the air. You're actually checking stuff all the time. You're doing a ton of this. This specific kind of checking, like I said, is called an if statement. You know that it is an if statement because it starts with if, and you can see that processing immediately changed it to green. Yes, so for Jonathan, for this particular one, we need there to be an end, or else it'll continue forever. This is essentially what this is. Like, you need to end stuff sometimes in games. Like in the case of our JAWS poster that we were looking at, or JAWS poster, if we want JAWS to, or whatever his name is, what's the shark's name? Anybody? Benny? Barry? I don't know. If we want it to bounce up and down, we need to say, okay, once the shark gets to a certain point, send it back down. Or else, yeah, it'll just keep going on forever. So these, in general, are called conditional statements. There are different kinds of conditional statements. Bruce, Peter says Bruce. That's the name of the shark. There are different kinds of conditional statements, and this one is an if statement. Let's talk about the grammar of our if statement. So we're starting here, we have the if, right? That's letting processing know, okay, this person is writing out basically a question. You're asking the computer something. So we're saying if, and then we have an open parentheses. You start your question to the computer with that parentheses. It's like the beginning of your question. And then you ask the question inside of the parentheses, and you end it with this closed parentheses right here. So you say, circ X. Yeah, Baby Yoda's back there. Grogu. So we're saying circ X. This is the left-hand part of the question. This is what we're saying, circ X. We want to know something about it. This middle part is where you are doing the sort of like what kind of checking you want to do. So all of those like equation statements you learned in math class can be used here. So I can check to see if circ X is the same as 300. If I want to check if it's the same, you have to use double equal signs. You can't use one, you have to use two. You can see that when I just have one, processing gets upset. It doesn't like that. So I can check to see if something is equal. I can check to see if something is less than or equal to. I can check to see if just it's less than, or I can check to see if something is just greater than. So you can do less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, greater than, less than, or just equal to. So I'm saying if circ X is greater than or equal to, and then on the right-hand side of my question is the number I'm checking. I'm checking to see if we have gotten to that point. So then I end it with my closed parentheses. So inside of the parentheses is like the question itself. If this condition is met, if this is true, then we have open curly brackets. Everything inside of my curly brackets between line 19 and line 21, that's the stuff that's gonna happen if this question turns out to be true. So if I want to visualize this, I can also do print ln, and remember print ln is for debugging. And we'll say hit 300. So you can see once we hit 300, now we are now forever and ever and ever, this is gonna return true. The circle is always greater than or equal to 300, so we're always going to stop there. We're always going to get inside of this question. This question is always going to be true as long as circ X is greater than or equal to 300. Peter asks how specific ifs can get. I would say very specific. Like I said, you can check to see if exactly something is happening. So I could say if circ X is exactly like let's do like 109.25, and then 190.25, sorry. And then if it hits that number, we're gonna make it become 190.25. It might be hard for it to hit this. It may not actually hit it, because this is so specific. Let's just do, because what happens is, in this particular situation, it can't get there, because we're never actually adding a decimal, we're just adding 1. So we should be able to do it just with 190. Still too fast. The computer is too fast for us. That's why it's typically better to do greater than or equal to. It gives us a little bit of leeway. So let's try that. Yeah, and then it'll stop. The issue is that sometimes the computer is running so fast that we're just straight up skipping over 190. Gabriel, the River organization, like our team, is S21GD105. That's our team. You should be in here, right? Yeah, you're right here, right? I'll at you in the chat. G. Cool. All right. So we're checking to see this number, like when do we hit the end? So again, I want it to be like the very end of the screen, so I'm going to stick with that. So if in this particular situation, if is to get it to stop, but you can actually use if for a ton of stuff. In this case, right now we are using this if statement to stop the circle, but now that we know we can stop the circle, we're going to get the circle to move the other direction. We want it to bounce to the other side of the screen, like it's a ball. So what we're going to say is if circ is greater than or equal to 300, circ x equals 300. We actually don't want to do that anymore. We're going to change a couple of things about our code. And here's where we're going to get into a little bit of logic. A lot about coding, people will tell you like, oh, you need to know a bunch of math for code. You don't really to know the basics. You do have to understand the basics of logic though. A lot of making code is trying to think through a puzzle basically. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to make our circle go to the right side of the screen, hit it, and bounce back. And we need a couple of extra variables to do that. So I'm going to use a Boolean. I'm going to say Boolean go right equals true. Oh, not Boolean, sorry. In Unity you say go just bool instead of Boolean, and I got confused. Remember, a Boolean is a true or false kind of variable. It can only hold true or false. So at the beginning of the game, I do in fact want my circle to go right. So I'm going to say, I'm gonna get rid of this code for now. I'm going to basically start over so that all I have is my change the color to the background to yellow and draw my circle to remind us. Looks like this. So I'm going to say if go right equals true. So if go right, that Boolean is true, we want to then change circle speed, have circ, oh no, someone's out the door. Hey pup, hey pup, shh, shh, shh. Hey, no. We want to have circ x plus equals circle speed.
Thank you.
Hey, no, pup. Hey. No. Sorry, y'all. She's a good dog. A little jumpy. We okay? Okay. So we're going to say if go right is true. If we want to go right, then move right. Again, in terms of like the behavior, we're doing like exactly what we started with. We're just adding this stuff so that we can basically engineer the logic to have that bouncing motion. And we're going to say else if, this is a new kind of conditional. What this means is that if this thing is false, if we no longer want to go right, do something else. Do another thing. So we'll say else if go right is false, we're going to do something else. We're going to say instead circ x minus equals circle speed. For now, again, we're not actually going to get different behavior. If we look again, we see that our circle is just moving over to the right. We need it to get that bouncing motion. But right now, what we have is we have nothing telling us when we want to change go right. We need to tell the computer at what point we need to start going right. So we are going to nest our if statements. We're going to first ask, hey computer, are we going right? Okay, cool. If we are going right, we're going to say then if circ x is greater than or equal to 300, then in that case, once we've reached the edge of the screen, we will say circ x, or sorry, not circ x, go right equals false. So we've reached one end of the screen. Great. Now I need to tell the computer that we don't want to go right anymore. We want to go the opposite direction. So let's go ahead and watch to see what happens now. So we reach the edge of the screen, and now we start bouncing the other direction. The problem is, when we're bouncing the other direction, we want to go back, right? So now we do have the circle moving left, but we want it to start moving back to right once it gets over to the end. To do that, we do a really similar thing to what we did here on line 22, 23, and 24. We just do it inside of this else-if statements. So instead, we'll say, if circ x is less than or equal to 0, curly brackets, go right equals true. So now we have our circle, hits the end, goes the other direction, hits the end, goes the other direction. We have the behavior we wanted. We have that ball bouncing back and forth. If you're feeling confused right now, that's okay. Let's stop for a second and just like go in depth about what's happening. And if there's something in particular you're unsure of, let me know in chat so we can go more in depth. So we're really interrogating these lines here, lines 20 through 30. It took about 10 lines of code to get that effect we wanted. So let's review. Let's comment it out, because what's going to happen after class is I'll post this on open processing for y'all to see and reference later. So I'll say this is asking if the ball should go to the right. I am recording the stream. Yeah, so I'm recording the stream. It'll be up on YouTube once it's done. You have to make them public, and I don't want to make them public. But yeah, you'll be able to access them on this channel afterwards. Okay, so this is asking if the ball should go to the right, okay? We ask the question. We let processing know we're asking the question with the word if. We ask the question inside of our parentheses. There's two sides. The thing that we're checking, the Boolean go right. The right side is what we're checking for. We want to know if it is true. And we say equals equals. When you're asking the computer a question, when you're using a conditional, you have to use two equal signs inside of processing. So we ask our question, and then we say, if that is true, if this is the case, do everything inside of these curly brackets. And this is where things can get confusing, especially when you're first starting out coding. You lose track of your curly brackets. It's really, really important because the order of these brackets matter. What happens inside of this set of curly brackets between lines 20 and 25 is the result of whether or not we should go right. If we get that messed up, we could get bugs, and it'll be really frustrating, and we'll get stressed out. A way to sort of prevent losing track of your curly brackets is one, using tabbing. So again, to draw attention to how after I have void draw, I tab over to the right one time. This is like one tab. Then after I ask an if statement and I use a new curly brackets, I tab again, like that. So that means everything that's tabbed over like this goes inside with this if statement. Then when I do another if statement here on line 22, after its curly bracket, once again, I say tab. So what the tabbing does, it helps me read the code. It makes things easier. It'll make your life easier as the person coding, so that you can understand what you're doing, and it makes my life easier as the person grading. In a few weeks, once we sort of catch our stride with this stuff, I'm going to start grading on whether or not you're correctly tabbing, correctly formatting your code. So it's a good time to start practicing. So I know that I'm inside of this if statement because we're in the curly brackets and I have these tabs. If I wanted to double check how the curly brackets match up, you can see that if I click just to the right and I have my cursor to the right of this curly bracket, on line 25 it puts like a square around the ending curly bracket. So processing is trying to tell you where it begins and where it ends. I believe the reverse is true, so that if I click onto the right of this ending curly bracket, it'll then put a square around the beginning curly bracket. So if this is true, we're in this if statement. First, we add 1 to circle speed, add 1 to, or not circle speed, to circ x, which is our x position. And then this is asking if the circle's position is greater than or equal to 300. So I'm asking another question. This is so that I can find out when I've hit the end of the screen. So I'll say, if that is true, if we have in fact hit the end of the screen, then go to the left. Do not go right. I know it's a little confusing because we're saying go right equals false, but you can think of it as like this now means we want to go left. Then we end this if statement. That's what this curly bracket is. I can see that its partner is up here on line 22. We end it again on line 25. This curly bracket is ending its partner on line 20. And then I say else if, and remember, else if asks if the first if statement is false, then check this question. What I mean by that is when I say else if asks if the first if statement is false, there's getting like so many ifs here, it's almost confusing. If the first if statement is false, then check this question. So if line 20 is false, then we go into here and we check here. Because we're using a Boolean, because that's what go right is, that means pretty much always if this is false, this is going to be true. So if this is false, go right is false. That means we're definitely going to get in here. Something happened in my formatting. Let me fix that. There we go. And we're basically doing the opposite here. So we subtract 1 to circ y. And then this is asking if the circle's position is less than or equal to 0. So then we're moving left. If the circle hits 0 or less than 0, then we want to go back right. We want to go over there again. Then go to the right. Finally, we draw the circle. And we have our bouncing ball that's going back and forth. If statements, as I said, they're really super important. There's stuff that we're checking in video games all the time. So this is a way to add an animation that can go on forever. But sometimes when it comes to games, we aren't just checking to see if a number has hit a certain position. We're also checking to see if the player has done something, like if the player has pressed a button. So what we're going to be learning next is actually how to use inputs. Your homework is going to be to make a drawing program, like basically Microsoft Paint, a very, very simple version of Microsoft Paint. And what we're going to do now is talk about exactly how to get input effects, how to use your mouse, and how to use your keyboard with processing. So I'm going to actually just open up a new project for this one. I'll save it as lecture 2.2. Cool. And what we want to do now is I want my paint program that I'm making to draw a red rectangle every time I hold down on my mouse. So first thing I do, I have my new processing file. I always say void setup, void draw. And inside of setup, let's just go ahead and set the size of my screen. I'll say 400, 500. Cool. And then let's set up our variables. I'm going to set up 3 variables so I can change the color of my screen, of my rectangle. So I'll say float red val, let's say equals 255. So I'm going to draw a red rectangle. So float green val equals 0. Float blue val also equals 0. Someone's like drag racing in the street, I think. I don't know what's happening. Sorry if y'all can hear that. So I've declared my variables. I'm going to be a good programmer. I'm going to comment. I'm going to say, let's just do it above. Don't need to do it line by line. I'll say these are the RGB color values of my rectangle. and now I'm going to go into draw. So when we want to do input in a game, when I say input, I'm always referring to like using the mouse, using the keyboard, or using a controller. We always want to do that in draw, because remember, draw runs every single frame. And what we want to do is we want to check to see if the player is pressing the mouse button every single frame. This is not something we can do in setup, because setup runs once at the very beginning. There's like a millisecond that we could check for that. So don't want setup for this. So what I'm going to say to check to see if the player is pressing the mouse is say, if I'm asking a question, I start my question with an open parenthesis, and I'm going to say mouse pressed. Close my question with a closed parenthesis, open curly bracket, open curly brackets. This is a new thing. I haven't talked about this. What is this mouse pressed deal? Because we kind of know that it's something special because it turned pink. I don't think anything we've done so far has turned pink. And second of all, when I was just talking about variables and conditionals, I was doing like equals true, and I was using my variables that I already created, my circle speed and my go right stuff. Yeah, so somebody asked about the float green val or float orange val for RGB color. You actually don't have to do that. We can talk about this more in a second. Let me add that to a comment. Sometimes I do this so that I can remember what to do later. I'll say to do talk about color values. The reason that I probably wouldn't do like green val, orange val and stuff is because when I'm saying red val, green val, blue val is because fill and background, when I give those three numbers to the function, those are like the amount of red, the amount of green, or the amount of blue that I want to paint, essentially. And so there is no like orange value to fill. Rather, to create orange value, we would have to have different amounts of like, I think it's red and green to get orange, maybe. It might be a little blue too. So instead we would do something like 140 and 100 or 1,100 or something. I have this in my to-do. We'll visualize this later on. But no, I probably wouldn't say green val or orange val, just to keep it straight in my head. But we can still make green or orange. Green or orange. Okay, so in draw, I said if mouse pressed, and I was talking about this thing right here. It's pink, which means it's different. It also looks different from the if statements I just made. So mouse pressed is a built-in variable. Processing, because it is this library of code that will be really helpful for people to use in their software, has a bunch of built-in variables that people commonly want to check. People, if they're making a game or they're making an art project, they often want to be able to know if their user or their player is pressing a mouse button, or to know where the cursor is on the screen. That actually takes like a lot of code to set up. So behind the scenes, processing has a bunch of code that does all the work for you, that does all the work to check to see if mouse is pressed, and after it does all of that work to find out about the mouse, then you just have to use the convenient little mouse pressed variable. Yeah, so there also, later after we talk about this mouse stuff, there's also keyboard stuff to do too. Again, a bunch of built-in stuff that processing has to make our lives easier. If you're never totally sure about what a variable is doing, again, come here to the processing reference page. I think it'll be, let me do, this is an input, yeah. There's a whole input section with a bunch of mouse and file variables and functions. Today, we're gonna stick with using just a few of these, but all of these are gonna be super, super helpful. So if I go to the mouse pressed page where it tries to explain what mouse pressed is, you can see that it says the mouse pressed variable stores whether or not a mouse button is currently being pressed. So stores whether or not I'm holding my left mouse button down. Second thing I want you to notice about what I did is that I only put mouse pressed. I didn't put equals. A second ago, I was telling you that like a conditional statement had to have these two sides, right? It should look something like this. we can assume mouse pressed is a Boolean because pressing the mouse can really only be true or false. If we needed to verify that, we could go ahead and check the mouse pressed page to see what would happen. So if it's a Boolean, then Karina said that I need this double equal signs and I need to say true. You could 100% write it like this, if this makes more sense to you. You could also just say, if mouse pressed. The way that processing just interprets this is, if mouse pressed is true. It's like the same thing. It's the shorter way of writing the same thing. So this is, well, let me do it on the same line so that when you have this, you know for sure. This is the same thing as asking if mouse pressed equals true. It would be the same line, just a little shorter. So I'm going to say if mouse pressed equals true, we're going to draw a rectangle. So I'm going to say fill, red val, green val, blue val, and then rect. Let's just make it like for now 100, 100, 40, 40. So when I press the mouse button, a red rectangle is going to be drawn at these coordinates. Let's check it out. Not pressing anything, not pressing anything, press the mouse button. Oh my god, then a red square just appeared on the screen in the position I said it would. I keep pressing it. Visually nothing is happening, but behind the scenes in processing, it actually is thinking it's drawing more rectangles. So that's pretty cool. But maybe like I want maybe instead of drawing here, I want the rectangle to draw in the very center of the screen. There's a couple of ways to go about this. If I want it to draw in the very center of the screen, I could think, oh, well, the screen's width is 400, so half of the screen is 200. The screen's height is 500, so half of the screen would be 250. If I did that, it could kind of get my square in the center. You could do that, but you could instead say another built-in variable that processing has called width divided by 2 and height divided by 2. These are more very convenient built-in variables that processing has. You can see that because they turned pink. Width is the width of your window and height is the height of the window. So it's going to give me the exact same thing, but it's more convenient. I didn't have to do any of that math. Although I did make processing do some math because I have this slash. This is the same thing as division, essentially. So I'm saying divide width by 2, or the half of the screen, and then divide height by 2, or go half of the screen. So someone just asked, so if can be used for different things like stop or go right. It can be used for so much. Like I said right here, we're using if to check just if the mouse is pressed. Don't really think of the if as like a thing that stops something or goes right. You can literally check for anything and then do anything. It does not just have to be for stopping or going right, but often we might use it for something like that. For example, if I have to make a drawing program for homework, because that's what your homework is, I actually would probably want my rectangle to draw at my mouse's position, right? That's how Microsoft Paint works. I want to hold my button down and then draw the rectangle. So I need it to draw at the rectangle's position, or at the mouse's position. And if I wasn't sure, how do I get the position of my mouse on the screen, I could check out the processing page. I could go to this big old thing and I'm looking at input, and I know it has to do with input because that's where Karina said that all of our keyboard and mouse stuff is. I can see that there's a mouse section, and it has all of this list: mouse button, mouse clicked, mouse dragged. That seems to have to do with stuff, with actions that the mouse might do. If I go down, I can see that there's this thing called mouse X and a thing called mouse Y. That's interesting. If I click on it, mouse X, because I'm not sure. It sounds like it's what I want because I want the position of the mouse, but I want to be sure. And it does say the system variable mouse x always contains the current horizontal coordinate of the mouse. That sounds like what I want. That sounds like it's the x position of my cursor. So I can actually use that for my rectangle, and I can say mouse x, mouse y. And you can see again, they turned pink, meaning it's like a built-in variable. So now when I go to press play, and I hold down my button, I have my cool little rectangle actually following my cursor around. If I stop pressing the button, the rectangle is gone. It no longer follows around my cursor. Okay. So let's walk through and we'll actually comment our code so that if you go to look at this later, we'll say if the mouse button is pressed, and just so you know that this is the same thing as asking if mouse pressed equals true, then fill in the shape with these colors, and then draw the square at the mouse's position. That's exactly what's happening. So I finished showing you how to do this to make like the start of our drawing program. But somebody asked, like, what about the color value stuff, right? Like, what if I want an orange color? I don't want a red color. What I can do is change the values up here. So if I want orange, I think it would be like, let's try 150 for red, and then 50 for green. Let's see what that does. That's not good. Let's try, what's 150 green also? What will that give me? That might be like yellow. Yeah, it's like this ugly yellow. Maybe a little bit of blue. Still kind of a ugly color. If I'm not sure and I want to have an orange color, but I can't figure it out, because what I'm doing here, it's kind of like adding paint together. Paint or colors in a computer doesn't work the way it works in reality, where we would add red and yellow to get orange, because rather than red, yellow, blue, we're using red, green, blue. That's how computer color works. So it's a little harder for us to wrap our brains around because we're used to the color spectrum of red, yellow, blue. So it's often easier just to go to the color picker. So I'll type in the color picker, and conveniently right here on orange, holy crap. What I'm looking for is our RGB values right here. This is my red val, this is my green val, and this is my blue val. So I can use these numbers up here. So I can say red val is 186. I'm just getting this number from Google, 186. My blue val is 128. And then my green val was 128, and my blue val is 2. So we have an orange square this time. It's like mixing paint inside of the computer. So I wouldn't use orange val because that's not accurate. We are mixing an amount of red, rather. It's a little weird, a little funky, maybe a little confusing. That's okay. Hopefully it'll start getting a little more clear in time. So I did that on my to-do list, so I'm gonna get rid of that. Okay. So there, you can do a bunch of stuff with our mouse pressed values here. Let's say that over time I want my my number for my red value to decrease as I hold the button down, and I want my green value to increase as I hold the button down. So I might say 0 for my green value just to start me off, go back to that red color, press play. I think there's a snow plow starting out outside my apartment. Hopefully that's not going to cover up too much of the sound. I want my red to decrease as I hold the button, and I want my green to increase as I hold the button. So I will say red val minus minus. Red val minus minus, this is the same thing as red val minus equals 1. So it's just subtracting 1. And then I can say green val plus plus. This is the same thing as green val plus equals 1. So now when I press play, slowly I get this cool color changing effect. It's going from red to green. If I really wanted to, maybe then once it gets to green, I want it to go back in the other direction. I would have to sit here, and just like how I went through and I thought about the logic of going back and forth on the screen with my ball, I could do the same thing here of going back and forth from red to green, green to red, red to green to red to green, back and forth forever and ever. Totally, definitely a cool thing that you might want to do for your homework. But now that we talked about the mouse, I now want to move on to talking about the keyboard, because that's another aspect that we'll have to do. Because cool, we have our rectangle drawing when I press down, but like, what if I wanted to change colors when I press a key? So I'm gonna get rid of these lines that I just did. I'm gonna comment them out. Is it Control? Yeah. What I just did to comment out these lines is highlight them. I hit Control on my keyboard. If you're on a Mac, it's Command, and then I did the / key. The reason I'm doing this instead of just deleting the code is so that I can reference it later. It's not going to run, but I might want to see it at a later time. Okay. So let's see. How am I on time? Pretty good. Okay. So now what I want to happen is when I press 1, 2, or 3 on my keyboard, it changes the color of my rectangle. So to start out, let's say I actually just want my rectangle to be black at first, so I'll say 0. So it just starts out no color, just black. And I will say a new if statements. I will say if key pressed. Again, it turned to pink, which means it's probably a built-in variable, and it's a built-in variable that processing has that checks to see if any key on my keyboard is pressed. Any of these keys, this will return true. But I don't want it to be true for any key. I want it to be true for specific keys. But first, let's just check to verify that, like, if any key is pressed, something will happen. So I'll say if key pressed, let's do red val, and we'll do something cool. Equals, let's say, random 0 to 55. So this is another new thing. That's weird. What is this new thing that I'm using? You can see that I typed in random. It might be hard to see on the stream, but it's blue. It's the same shade of blue as fill and rect. That means it's a function that processing has, a built-in function. And this built-in function gives us a random number between whatever we put in the parentheses. So it'll be a random number between 0 and 255. Every time I touch any key, that the red value will change. So let's watch it in action. I'm holding it down. I'm going to press a key. You can see for a second it was red. I'm just like holding keys down. It's just changing to random shades of red right now. Just by holding that. And I can hold any key down to make this happen. So that's what key press does, if any key is pressed. But I want to check to see if 1 is pressed, if 2 is pressed, or if 3 is pressed. So I need a specific variable to do that. So another built-in variable that processing has is called key. And that's the last key that was pressed. So if I say if key equals 1, we're going to do something. So if key equals 1, and you can see that I have the 1 in the apostrophes in the single quotation marks. That is, if you remember from last week, a char, which is 1 character. This is typically what we use chars for, is for keyboard stuff. Has to be in these single quotation marks. So killer ass 41, how do I change the color while it's being pressed? That's what we're doing right now. I want to change the color to red while 1 is being pressed. So I will say red val equals 255. not 266, 255. Green val equals 0, blue val equals 0. So that. Cool. Now I'm gonna press 1 on my keyboard, and now my rectangle is red. And it will always be red, because that was the last key I pressed. If I press some other key, nothing will happen, because I never told processing what to do if I press any other key. But I do want something to happen with some of the other keys. So I want it to be green when I press 2, and I want it to be blue when I press 3. So I have to say, if key equals 2, red val equals 0, green val equals 255. We want to go all the way green, and blue val equals 0 also. And then the same thing for 3. If key equals 3, red val equals 0, green val equals 0, and blue val equals 255. So that when I press play, black, I'll hit 1, now it's red, 2, now it's green, 3, and now it's blue. Which is pretty cool. I'll hit 1 again, now it's red, now it's blue, now it's green, now it's red. Maybe I want to set it back to black, so I could say if key equals 4, we'll say red val equals 0, green val equals 0, and blue val equals 0. It's like it's resetting our rectangle just to be black again. So starting out black, press 3, now it's blue, press 4, and now it's black again. So key pressed, again, is a built-in variable that processing has that asks, has any key been pressed? Then we're nesting our if statements in here. You can tell it's nested because we have these, we tabbed it over. And key is a built-in variable that checks what key was pressed. And so we're seeing if 1 is pressed, if 2 is pressed, if 3 is pressed, or if 4 is pressed. And this is about half of your homework, right? What I want you to do for your homework is to use these conditionals and to use our variables to create a paint program. Your paint program cannot be the exact same as my paint program here with the rectangles. I want you to adapt the code so it's a little bit different. If I find that everybody's just turning in this exact code, y'all aren't going to get very good grades. You need to start from scratch. You need to make it a little different. And then there's a second component to your homework that you're going to either need to come to office hours to talk about, to go to tutoring to talk about, or to look stuff up in the processing reference. That second part of the homework is, let me go into the conditionals week here. So the homework, create a drawing app. First, create a simple drawing program using processing. The drawing app should at least do the following: draw when pressing the mouse button, switch colors when the player presses certain keys, and then you have to do at least one of the following things here. Clear the screen when the player presses a certain key, change the paintbrush shape when the player presses a certain key. So if the player presses 9, it becomes a rectangle. If the player presses 8, it becomes a circle. Or change the background color when the player presses a certain key. You have all of the tools and the concepts that you need to do this code. I promise 100%. It might sound scary now because I didn't directly do it, but I want y'all to try to figure it out on your own. If that's troublesome, let's first walk through it theoretically. I'm not going to do the code myself, but I'm going to walk through what I might think to get to the process of actually starting to write this code. So I've made the first part of my homework. I have my drawing program that draws the rectangle when I press the mouse button, and it changes colors when I press the keys on my keyboard. But I need to do the second parts. I need to do one of these things. So I'll say, let me focus on this. When I press a key, I want my brush to change into a circle. So what I might say is, I need to think this through. So I need to check first what key has been pressed. So I need to check if the player hit the, let's say, 6 key on the keyboard. If that is true, then draw a circle. And then if the player hasn't pressed the 6 key, draw a rectangle. This is me on lines 41 through 45 writing in what's called pseudo code. Pseudo code is like the logic of the code that you're about to write. It's just not in the exact language the program needs. So processing can't read this, but I can. So I can look at this and then I can try to translate it into processing's language. This is in human language, now I need to change it to computer language. So if I were to do this, I might start typing out if key pressed and if key equals 6, and go from there, right? Because then I just covered this whole line right here of 45. I'm checking to see if the player hit the 6 on the keyboard. This is what I think is super helpful to start doing when you have to start doing code from scratch. For the last 2 homeworks, what you really had to do is just kind of visualize something and draw it using our shapes. I was trying to get you used to the coordinate system in processing. I was trying to get you used to using variables with this last homework. But with this homework, I'm kind of asking you to start thinking a little bit creatively with your logic. So you're gonna have to sit down and think it through, and it'll be frustrating, which is why you need to email me or message me or come to office hours or go to tutoring so that you can figure this stuff out. I'm always here to help, and I'm always excited to help, honestly. Like, I get super hyped when people ask me questions. So please make my day and ask me a question about code outside of class. This about covers what I wanted to cover for today. It's the basics of using conditionals, a little bit more about variables. Are there any final questions that anybody has? You can type them in the chat if you have any before I end the stream for today. What's going to happen now is that I'm going to quit, I'm going to finish commenting my code, and I'm going to upload these to Open Processing so you can reference it. You'll be able to reference it to use it yourself if you need to. I'll also post a link to this stream in the River chat as well, so you can check that out outside of class if you need to. And I'll also, after class, make sure to post when tutoring happens. Again, super helpful resource. How do you clear the stuff? That's a good question, Killer Ass 41. I talked to y'all about clearing the screen at the beginning of class with our ball that goes back and forth, right? Before I had that weird cylinder thing, and somebody else was talking about the issue that they had where that it kept drawing and making that weird cylinder shape all over every single frame. And I told you had to use background at the beginning of draw to clear. I think probably if you use background, it might give you that clear effect when you press the key. So try out if you can sort of figure out exactly how to use background when it comes to clearing the screen. But if you're a little bit stumped, again, come see me, send me a message, and I'll try to help you walk through it. But I want everybody to at least try to figure out this second part of the homework themselves. Then I also want to point out, most of you are doing this now. Make sure you write your devlog. Answer these questions. Doesn't have to be super long. Do this. No, Killer Ass 41, I understand what you mean by the painting, clear like the painting stuff, like you want to clear the canvas. You will have to use background to do that. Good, great that you fixed your homework with background. I'll probably start grading today or tomorrow, and everybody will get their comments. And yeah, thanks for a good class, everybody. Seems like this streaming thing went pretty smoothly, and I will see y'all next week.